If you spend your whole life proving that you are worthy, but in the end, all you receive is rejection, what will you do? I never thought this day would come, the day when everything I worked for, everything I sacrificed sleep, youth, countless sleepless nights would finally be put on the scale. But instead of receiving the reward I deserved, I was cast aside as if I had no value at all. I am Olivia Carter, 28 years old, Chief Strategy Officer at Carter Holdings, a multi-billion-dollar financial empire founded by my father. I have been working here since I was 22, starting from the lowest position, enduring countless high-stakes meetings and devising strategies that help the company navigate financial crisis. I have nothing but a sharp mind, an unbreakable will, and a single ambition to prove myself. But to my father, Richard Carter, the founder of Carter Holdings, nothing I do matters because I am not a son. As I stepped into the boardroom on the 50th floor of our headquarters, the atmosphere was so tense it could be cut with a knife outside the bustling cityscape of New York, shimmered against the glass skyscrapers, but inside this room, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a precipice. My father sat at the head of the table, his gaze as cold and sharp as ever. Beside him was Ethan Carter, my brother who had never worked a serious day in his life, but always occupied the highest seat. To my left was a group of shareholders and board members, all waiting for the most important announcement of the year. I sat down, clenching my hands under the table. Today would be the day I officially claimed the positive ion I had earned. I'll get straight to the point. My father began, his voice deep and authoritative. After careful consideration, I have decided who will succeed me as CEO of Carter Holdings. My heart pounded. I was ready, but then Ethan will take on this role. Everything inside me shattered. It took me a second to process what I had just heard. I blinked, staring at my father, thinking I must have misheard Ethan, the one who had never attended an important meeting, the one who dropped out of college after 2 years because he was bored, the one who had never held a leadership position in the company that I had devoted my youth to building across the table. Ethan smirked, not a proud or grateful smile, but a victorious one. I planted both hands on the table, my voice as sharp as a blade. "You can't be serious." My father's expression remained unchanged. He simply looked at me as if assessing how I would react. I was very serious when I made this decision. He replied. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Ethan has never actually worked at Carter Holdings. He has no experience, no knowledge, and no sense of responsibility for this company. I said, my voice growing sharper. I've been working here since I was a fresh graduate. I saved this company from a financial crisis. 2 years ago, I secured deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. You know that my father's side, as if I were an annoyance. Olivia, you've done very well, but you are a woman. A cold shiver ran down my spine. And so what? I nearly hissed. He placed both hands on the table, his tone slow and unwavering. The financial world is not meant for women. Carter Holdings needs a strong man to lead. This is not the right place for you. I shot up from my seat. Not the right place. I let out a bitter laugh. So no matter how hard I work, no matter how much smarter, more capable, and more dedicated I am than Ethan, I still won't be chosen just because I'm not a man. My father said nothing, but his silence was worse than words. Ethan leaned back in his chair, smirking. Relax, little sister, he said. No need to get so worked up. You can still work under me. I'll make sure you have a stable position. I turned to him, my gaze like a blade. I would rather die than work under you. I looked at my father one last time. Thank you, I said, my voice eerily calm. Thank you for showing me exactly how you see me. Thank you for proving that I was never truly part of Carter Holdings, my F. The other said nothing. He simply stared at me, his gaze as cold as if I had never been his daughter. I turned and walked out of the boardroom without looking back. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. I would never let them underestimate me again. They might think I had lost, but I would make them regret ever doubting me. I drove home back to the mansion where I had spent my childhood, but tonight, I wasn't going back to rest. I was going back to leave. I pulled my suitcase into the center of my room and started packing. I didn't have much to take, some business clothes, My laptop, important documents, and an old photo of my mother, and from my childhood, the door swung open. My mother stood there, her usual gentle demeanor unchanged, but her eyes filled with worry. "Olivia, what are you doing, Nung?" she asked softly. I zipped up my suitcase and straightened. "I'm leaving." She took a deep breath as if she had seen this coming. "Olivia, your father. He's just doing what he thinks is best." I let out a bitter laugh. Best for whom, certainly not for me, she stepped into the room, gently taking my hand. "My love, I know you're talented, but sometimes in life, there are things we just have to accept." I pulled my hand away. "No, Mom, you spent your whole life accepting things, but I won't." My mother fell silent, her eyes reflecting a deep, profound sadness. I knew she loved me, but she wasn't strong enough to fight. I turned away, pulling my suitcase behind me in the hallway. I ran into Ethan. He was still wearing his silk shirt, a glass of red wine in hand, leaning casually against the wall, as if everything that had happened was just a comedy for his amusement, really leaving. He sneered. "Well, good luck, little sister. No one leaves this family without regret," I didn't answer. I just looked at him for a second, then walked away. This was the last time I would stand in Carter Holding, Shadow, New York is a vast city. But that night it felt like there was nowhere for me to go. I rented a small apartment in Chelsea. It was nothing compared to the lavish Carter mansion, but at least it was mine. I knew I couldn't live off my savings forever. I needed a job, and not just any job, I needed a position worthy of my abilities. I sat in front of my laptop, scrolling through the list of New York's top financial firms. I knew Carter Holdings' competitors, I had studied them extensively, and one name stood out: Hayes Capital. Daniel Hayes, the CEO of Hayes Capital, was a renowned figure in the investment industry. I had heard of him, a smart, decisive man who didn't care about background, only about competence. I sent my application. Just 3 days later, I received an email from Hayes Capital. They wanted to meet me that morning. I dressed in a gray suit, hair neatly tied back, and walked into the sleek, imposing Hayes Capital building. There wasn't a trace of fear in me when I entered the conference room. Daniel Hayes was already there, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Tell me." "Olivia," he began without glancing at my resume. "Why did you leave Carter Holdings?" I smiled faintly because my father doesn't believe women can lead. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Intrigued, and you're here to prove him wrong." I met his gaze head on. "No. I'm here to prove to myself that he never had the right to judge me." A moment of silence passed. Then Daniel smiled. "Good, I like that confidence," he noted. "Welcome to Hayes Capital." I threw myself into work, determined to prove that I was more than just Carter's daughter. I worked 16-hour days analyzing markets, managing investment deals worth hundreds of millions at Host Capital. No one treated me like an outsider. They only cared about results. Gradually, I built my own reputation. Within 6 months. I closed 2 major deals that significantly boosted the firm's profits. Daniel Hayes started entrusting me with bigger projects. Then one day he called me into his office. He placed a file on the table, tapping his fingers lightly on its cover. "Do you want to destroy Carter Holdings?" I raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his smile sharp. "They're facing a major lawsuit. If we move at the right time, we could bring them down." I flipped through the file, and then I saw a name: Ethan Carter. He was at the center of this lawsuit. He had made a mistake, a big one, and I was the only one who knew exactly how to take him down. I closed the file, my eyes gleaming. "When do we start?" Daniel laughed, clearly pleased. "I knew you'd enjoy this one." I leaned back in my chair. I had once thought leaving Carter Holdings was the end, but it turned out it was just the beginning. I stared at the file before me, adrenaline coursing through my veins. This wasn't just the lawsuit. This was my chance to topple Carter Holdings, to bring Ethan down, and most of all, to prove to my father that he had been wrong. Daniel Hayes watched me, his eyes filled with anticipation. You're the perfect person to lead this case." "Olivia," I slowly placed my hand on the stack of files, flipping through each page. Numbers don't lie. Carter Holdings was being sued for financial fraud, and Ethan was at the center of it all. He had signed a fraudulent contract, causing an investment firm to lose millions of dollars. They were suing Carter Holdings for fraud, and this lawsuit could ruin their reputation. I looked up, meeting Daniel. Expectant gaze. "I'll take the case," I said, my voice steadier than ever. Daniel smiled. I didn't expect any other answer. I dove into work like a storm, together with a team of lawyers and financial experts. We dug into Carter Holdings records, analyzing every transaction, every poor decision Ethan had made. And the more I investigated, the more I saw his incompetence. Ethan H. had tried to cover his mistakes, but he wasn't smart enough to erase the evidence. Emails, faulty documents, irresponsible decisions. They were all here in my hands. I pictured his smug face when he took the CEO position, thinking he could control everything with ease. He had no idea that I would be the one to pull him down from the throne he never deserved. 3 weeks into the lawsuit, I received an unexpected call from a block number. I answered. Olivia, a deep voice came through. It was my father. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I know you're the one behind this lawsuit," he said, his voice not angry, not accusing, just stating a fact. I smirked. Yes, and he was silent for a moment before speaking again. "Do you really want to destroy this company?" I let out a soft chuckle. "No, I don't want to destroy the sea." "Ompany." I paused. "I just want to destroy the people who turned it into a joke." There was a long silence on the other end. Finally, he sighed. "Ethan made mistakes, but this is still your family." "Olivia, this time?" I laughed out loud. "Family." I repeated, "You threw me away the moment you said I had no place in Carter Holdings. I did what I thought was right." "No, you did what you thought was right for a man. And now when you realize Ethan is incompetent, you suddenly remember me?" No response. Just heavy silence. I tightened my grip on the phone. "You'd better prepare yourself, because there will be no mercy in this trial." I hung up. My heart pounded in my chest, but I had no regrets. This wasn't personal anymore. This was justice a week before the trial. I unexpectedly received a meeting request from Ethan. I almost refused it immediately, but then I reconsidered. I wanted to see him at his weakest, to watch him realize he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. We met at an upscale cafe where he still pretended as if he had everything under control. "Olivia," he started, setting down his espresso. "Look, are you really going to do this? So your own family's company?" I crossed my arms, my eyes never leaving his. "This is not my family." He exhaled, trying to appear calm. "But you know me, I'm not a bad guy. I just ran into some difficulties." I raised an eyebrow. "Difficulties? You lost tens of millions of dollars. You tried to cover it up by falsifying records, and now you call that difficulties?" Ethan swallowed hard. He no longer had the confidence he had when he took over as CEO. He looked at me for the first time in his life with desperation. "You can help me, Olivia. Talk to the plaintiffs. Help me negotiate. We can settle this without going to court." I stared at him, disgust rising in my chest. "Did you ever help me?" I asked, my voice low, but razor sharp. Ethan didn't answer. I stood up, leaning down to whisper in his ear. "Get ready, Ethan. I'm not just going to take this company from you. I'm going to make sure the whole world sees that you never deserved it." Then I turned and walked away. Ethan called after me. "Olivia, we're family." I didn't stop. There was nothing left between us the night before the trial. I sat in my office, gazing out at the glowing streets of New York City. Beside me was a thick stack of documents, undeniable proof that Ethan Carter had destroyed the very company my father had built. I took a sip of wine, breathing in deep. Tomorrow, I would walk into that courtroom and face my father, my brother, and everyone who had ever believed I wasn't good enough. They were wrong, and I would make them pay for it. That morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The city was still cloaked in a soft, misty haze. As I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my shirt collar and fastening the cuffs of my blazer. Today wasn't just any day. Today was the day I stood before my father and my brother, not as the rejected daughter, but as a woman who held her own destiny in her hands. I stepped out of my apartment, took a deep breath, and got into the car. When I arrived at the federal courthouse in Manhattan, the flashes from the reporter cameras erupted immediately. "Olivia Carter, do you have any comments on this lawsuit? Do you feel conflicted going up against your own family?" I kept my eyes straight ahead. my face unreadable. What I felt wasn't hesitation, it was readiness inside the courtroom. Tension hung thick in the air. I walked to the plaintiff's table, placing my briefcase on the desk across from me at the defendant's table. My father sat with his back straight, his face cold and unreadable, as stone Ethan sat beside him. But this time, the confidence he once wore so easily was gone. I saw his hands clenched tightly, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. I smiled to myself. He knew the game was over. Court is now in session. The judge's gavel came down and the battle officially began as the plaintiff I opened with a sharp, precise statement. Carter Holdings, one of the largest financial corporations in the United States, has abused its power to manipulate markets, conceal failed investments, and deceive its shareholders. I walked slowly around the room, locking eyes with the jury. But what's most alarming is not just these mistakes, it's the utter irresponsibility of the people running this company. I paused, turning to face Ethan. He kept his head down after my statement. The defense's lawyer tried to push back, calling this a misunderstanding and claiming Carter Holdings never intended to commit fraud. I almost laughed. This was the moment I brought out my most damning piece of evidence. "Please turn to Exhibit 17, I said calmly. The courtroom screen lit up, displaying a series of emails between Ethan and Carter. Holding senior executives in those emails, Ethan had ordered the concealment of hundreds of millions of dollars in losses, instructing his team to falsify financial reports to mislead investors. The jury's eyes widened. I heard whispers ripple through the reporters in the back. The defense's lawyer scrambled to object, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped forward. "Please read this line," I said, pointing to one message. "We cannot let the shareholders find out about this loss. Cover it up. Do whatever it takes." Then I turned to Ethan, my voice as sharp as a blade. "Would you care to explain this statement, Ethan?" He had no answer. The trial stretched on for days. But with every passing day, Carter Holdings sank deeper into the quicksand. Ethan kept dodging questions, and their lawyer couldn't refute the overwhelming evidence I had gathered. My father kept his calm exterior, but I knew he was starting to see the truth. Carter Holdings was losing. In the end, they offered a settlement, a steep price, hundreds of millions in damages, the company's reputation in ruins, and most importantly, Ethan was forced to resign when their lawyer presented the deal. I turned to my father. He didn't look at me. He just gave a quiet nod as if he had known this was inevitable. Ethan, he just sat there, his fists clenched, his face pale as a sheet. I signed the agreement, and that was the end of Ethan Carter. After the trial, I walked out of the courtroom. Reporters swarmed around me, but I didn't stop. And then right at the courthouse steps, I saw my father waiting. No pride left, no arrogance, just a man who had lost everything. I stopped in front of him. We stood there for a few seconds silent. Then he sighed. "You won?" I gave a small, cold smile. "No, Father. I was right." He didn't argue after a long pause. He finally asked, "What will you do now?" I crossed my arms, meeting his gaze. Keep doing what I do best. Keep building my own path." Slowly he nodded, and for the first time in my life, I saw respect in his eyes. No more words were needed. I turned and walked away. That night, I sat alone on the balcony of my apartment, a glass of red wine in my hand. I had done what no one thought I could do. I had beaten my family in a battle they never believed I could win. But more importantly, I had found myself. I was no longer Richard Carter's daughter. I no longer had anything to prove to anyone. I was Olivia Carter, and the world had never been ready for me. I thought that after the trial, everything between my father and me would be over. No more Carter Holdings, no more family ties, no more pointless battles. But I was wrong. 3 days after my victory, my father came looking for me. I had just walked into my office when my assistant Rachel stopped me looking anxious. "Olivia, Richard Carter is waiting in your office." I froze for a second. I hadn't expected him to come after everything that happened. I thought he'd hate me, see me as a traitor, as the daughter he had never wanted to acknowledge. I took a deep breath, adjusted my blazer, and pushed the door open. My father sat there in the office. I had fought so hard to earn, not a room handed to me because of the Carter name, but a room I had conquered on my own. He wore his usual gray suit, but this time, The power he once carried so effortlessly was gone. He looked up at me. "Hello, Olivia." I leaned against my desk, arms crossed. "I'm surprised to see you here." He stayed silent for a moment as if searching for the right words. Finally, he sighed. "I want to talk." I gave a cold, bitter smile. "Now, you want to talk after I dragged your company to court, after Ethan lost his job, after you lost everything you ever tried to hold on to?" He nodded slowly, not arguing. "Yes," he said, "and I won't make excuses. I made mistakes." I stared at him, unable to believe my ears. "Ever since you were little," my father said, his voice lowering, "I always believed that the path for a daughter should be different. I grew up in a generation where women were underestimated. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you away from Carter Holdings." I clenched my fists. "No," I said, my voice sharp. "You didn't protect me. You held me back. You crushed every hope I had just because you couldn't accept one simple truth that I'm better than Ethan." He didn't argue. He just sat there looking tired. "And then I saw you in court." He shook his head slightly. "You weren't just good, you were brilliant. You destroyed Ethan, left him with no way out. And I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been so foolish from the start." I froze for the first time in my life. I heard my father admit he was wrong. My father took a deep breath, then placed a large envelope on the table. I raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" He pushed the envelope toward me. "Carter Holdings hasn't completely collapsed yet, but it's losing direction, and I can't lead it anymore." I looked at him, my heart pounding. "You can come back," he said slowly, "not under anyone's authority, not in my shadow, or Ethan's, but as the official CEO." I opened the envelopes, skimming the documents. The offer was real. He was handing the company over to me. I set the papers down, my hands trembling. "What about Ethan?" My father sighed, leaning back in his chair. "He destroyed his own chances. Now he has to find his own way." I didn't know what I felt at that moment. Satisfaction, joy, or just emptiness. I had spent my entire life seeking my father's recognition. Now that I had it, I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore. I stood up, pacing the room to calm myself. "I don't know," I said. "I don't know if this is what I want anymore." My father looked at me, not angry, not demanding, just a father who had lost too much time with his daughter. "You can take your time," he said. "No need to decide right away." I crossed my arms, giving a small, wry smile. Who would have thought this day would come? "Huh?" He nodded. I didn't. I looked at him for a long time. This man had once been the greatest obstacle in my life, but now, as he admitted his mistakes, as he placed the company's future in my hands, I realized he was no longer my enemy. He was just an old man trying to make things right. "I'll think about it," I said calmly. My father nodded. "I'll wait." He stood up, adjusting his jacket before leaving. He paused at the door and looked back at me one last time. "I know I've never said this enough," he said slowly, "but I'm proud of you, Olivia." I froze. I had waited my whole life to hear those words, and now that they had finally come, I didn't know how to respond. I just nodded. My father left, leaving me alone with my tangled thoughts as I looked down at the documents on the table. Carter Holdings. E.W. Olivia Carter. This was everything I had fought for, but now that it was within my reach, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go back. I had carved out my own path. I was no longer just the shadow of Carter Holdings. If I go back, I will have to fight in a world that once rejected me. But if I refuse, am I giving up the chance to change everything? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I could go back to take control of Carter Holding, or I could continue on my own journey. I have all the choices in the world. The only problem is which path will I choose. I sat in my apartment, the lights of New York City sparkling outside the window. My father's folder still lay on the table, open to the first page. CEO appointment contract. Carter Holdings. I had spent my entire life fighting for this moment, and now that it was in my hands, I hesitated. I had built a brilliant career at Hayes Capital. I was no longer the girl my father looked down on. I was no longer Olivia Carter, daughter of Richard Carter. I was my own person. So why did I still feel so empty? I remembered the feeling of walking out of the courtroom when my father finally admitted that I had done the right thing for the first time in my life. He didn't look at me as a daughter who had to obey. He looked at me as an equal. But was that enough? Was going back to Carter Holdings truly what I wanted? Or was I just trying to prove myself to someone who had once belittled me? I had gained the thing I had always craved recognition, but now I wasn't sure what it meant to me anymore. I could become the CEO of Carter Holdings, turning it into a new empire, one I built with my own hands, or I could continue on my own path where no one could say I achieved success. Because of the Carter name, I pulled out my phone and called Rachel, my assistant and best friend. "What's wrong?" she asked when she picked up. I sighed. "What do you think I should do?" Rachel didn't need to ask any questions. She knew exactly what I was talking about. "The question isn't what should you do, Olivia?" She said. "The question is, what do you really want?" I was silent. I didn't know. Or maybe I did know, but I wasn't ready to admit it. I stood up, picking up the folder. I knew that whichever path I chose, I wouldn't regret it. But I want to ask you, if you were me, what would you do? Would you return to Carter Holdings, take the CEO position, and turn it into your own empire? Or would you continue on your path of freedom, proving that you could build a legacy without relying on your family? I have a decision to make, but maybe I want to hear your opinion first.